What's your creepiest glitch in the Matrix or unexplainable thing that's ever happened to you? Subscribe for more, and follow my Reddit page in the description to join in. I remember being pretty young, like 9 or 10, and I was the car park of a pub in England, Southend. I remember seeing someone in their teens in the window of the house looking over the car park. They waved at me and I felt like I knew them somehow. My parents asked who I was waving at and I said just some lady in the window over there. Didn't think much of it. Fast forward 10 years. I was at my nan's new house. I remember walking into her room, which I never was allowed to do, going to the window. I then realized I was in the house looking over that same parking lot and remembering that interaction years before. Then a girl around 9 or 10 who was in said car park waved at me and I waved back. I felt like I knew her. Could not explain it and have never told anyone about it. It freaked me out. When I was a teenager, my family lived in a big 115-year-old brick house. Plenty of creepy stuff happened, but one night I was heading to bed when the door between the first floor kitchen and the basement stairs absolutely slammed shut. It had a unique sound that I recognized immediately as the kitchen/basement door. There were no windows open that could have caused a draft. Our dog was asleep on the second floor. I was on the second floor. My parents were both asleep in the third floor attic, had been converted to a master bedroom. None of us could have shut the door. Fucking terrified, I worked up the courage to go investigate, carrying my hilariously teeny pocket knife for protection. As I went downstairs I turned on every light. When I reached the kitchen, the door was wide open. Even more freaked out I ran back up to bed, leaving the lights on. A minute or two later, I heard a definite okay from downstairs. I laid in bed and was ready to accept my demise. Eventually I somehow fell asleep and in the morning I was there first downstairs. I woke up before my parents and dog, and found that the lights were all off and the basement door had been shut again. Weird but happy. About 5 years ago in November we lost our family dog to cancer. She was the dog my children grew up with, loved by all. At the next Christmas, at the end of the day of gifts, food and family, as I was picking up, I found a tiny pewter dog figurine sitting on the mantel. I asked everyone who had been at the house that day if they left it. No one had. Okay, weird, but took it as a good omen. When my eldest went back to college at the end of that Christmas break, he asked if he could take the little figurine, to remember his dog. Of course, I said yes. A week or two later, picking up around the house, there was the figurine again. I called my son, and said, "You forgot the dog figurine." He said, "No I didn't, it's right in front of me on my desk." I had now found a second figurine. Again, no one claimed any knowledge of it. No idea how, but I still have the two of them tucked away on a shelf to this day. Kind of reminds me of a rescue cat, Millie, my family had when I was a teenager. Millie had a hard life before us and had some brain damage, so needed constant babying, including being supervised when playing outside. One day I was watching her play, and she came to sit on the arm of the bench next to me and sun herself for a while. It started to go dark, so I called Millie to follow me inside, and as she stood up I saw this little metal thing that she had been sat on. I had a closer look, and it was a little silver angel charm. I thought it should belong to her as she had found it, so fastened it to her collar. That angel was with her on her collar until she passed last year. A while after she passed, my mom wanted to adopt another cat and was going through the old RSPCA files from her previous rescues, when she came across Millie's file. It had all her details, markings, DOB, health conditions, and her previous name on the top of the page, Angel. The reason it's so weird is that the angel charm that Millie had seemingly fabricated out of nowhere when I had found it. It didn't belong to me or anyone we knew, and was found, under Millie, in our securely enclosed back garden. Millie also had a particular hatred for Buddha, seeking out my mom's statues of him and throwing up on them, decapitating them, throwing them down the stairs and shattering them, but that's another story. Edit, a picture of the young lady in question, with said angel charm on her collar. Apologize for the quality, it was circa 2010. About a year ago me and my cousin visited Los Angeles. We were driving around using Google Maps and after missing our third or fourth exit we swear we both heard it sigh loudly before it rerouted us. We freaked out and made sure our driving was on point the rest of the ride. The rest of the trip there, if we missed any of our exits or turns, we always apologized to Google, so hopefully she would know we were just morons and not assholes. Removed a painting from the wall during a late evening cleaning, put it away and returned to the wall to see a never before seen painting on the same spot. Put a chill down my spine. I've told this story before. 3 years ago my childhood dog died very suddenly and unexpectedly. She was sick for a few days, but turned it around and got better before dying very quickly and painfully, in my dad's arms. I live out of state so I wasn't able to be there for any of it. It's a 6-hour drive, and I felt very guilty about her passing without me there. I had a very deep connection to her and she had been my best friend for 12 years. I was devastated by her death. I couldn't work or eat or do much of anything. I was constantly bursting into tears. It was just awful. My heart just ached and I found myself apologizing to her for not being there. I just felt so guilty. One night I had a dream about her. I dreamt I was in this empty space and Charlie came running up to me, whimpering excitedly. She was licking my face and generally just freaking out and I was sobbing. I knew she was dead and I knew she was visiting me in my dream. I was very aware of it all. I kept hugging her and crying and apologizing and she just kept licking my face and being affectionate. I woke up with tears streaming down my face and sat up in bed. I could still smell her distinctive smell and on my sleeve I pulled off one of her hairs. She had never been to my apartment and I hadn't seen her recently. It wasn't a cat hair either as Charlie was a collie mix and their fur pattern is very distinctive. It may all be coincidence but it was so vivid and real. I like to think she was visiting to let me know everything is okay and to not worry. I haven't had a dream like that since. I used to have a recurring dream as a teenager every night for months. I was sitting at a table on the patio of a restaurant. I was out there alone, waiting for my food. A homeless man comes up to the other side of the patio and asks for change. I'm digging in my wallet for a couple dollars and then I hear tires screech and look up to see a crash in an intersection near the restaurant. I run out there to see if I can help and as I run out into the road I get hit by a car and wake up at the impact. After a while the dream stopped and I put it out of my mind. Fast forward to me being 28 and sitting at and on the border, on the patio waiting for my food. A homeless guy comes walking past the restaurant but doesn't stop and ask for change. It makes me think about that dream though and I start to feel uneasy. Shortly after, I hear the tires screech and I see a wreck happen in the intersection near the restaurant. I begin to run out there but stop at the sidewalk and look out towards incoming traffic and there is an SUV not slowing down. She was on her phone and blew through the intersection completely unaware of what had just happened. Ran out and checked on the people. Everyone was fine. This happened around 1991. It's the middle of the night. I'm standing in my sister's living room and it must be a full moon, because even though it's around 1 AM and the lights are off, I can see clearly. There's a mixing bowl with popcorn kernels in the bottom on the floor in front of the TV and some rental VHS in a pile nearby. I hear a noise and turn around to see my sister's normally very friendly Labrador Retriever looking like Cujo. Fangs bared, snarling, hackles raised. Suddenly there's a bright flash of light and I wake up like I hit the bed from a great height. I think that was a weird dream. Eventually, I fall back to sleep and in the morning I call my sister, planning to tell her the story, but she preempts me by telling me about the weird thing that happened in the night. They woke up to the sound of the dog snarling at about 1 AM. Her husband thought there was a prowler in the house, got a gun and went to find the dog. She was standing in the living room snarling at the middle of the room. He couldn't see anyone, so he flipped on the light. No one was there. The dog instantly stopped snarling and walked to her bed like nothing had happened. He checked the property and went back to bed. We talked a bit and I found out they watched some rental movies and of course we had popcorn. Why? My sister is a little woo at times, so I decided not to tell her about my night. She lived about 450 miles away by the way. Edit, punctuation. How TF you trying to tell me you accidentally astral projected? Whack. Even more whack, the dog knew I was there. I wouldn't say that this was creepy, but it's definitely one of the most quaintly surreal things I've ever experienced. So, back in 2016, I was injured at work and for about 6 months my life consisted of going to physical therapy and being confined to bed until I could walk again. With that in mind, I had a lot of time to read books. One of the books that I was reading was Ex-Heroes, by Peter Clines. Now I don't know about anyone else, but when I read a book I liked to cast the characters in my head, coming up with how they look. One of the minor characters in this book was named Ilya and, because I know someone named Ilya, and because the book is set in Los Angeles where I live, the Ilya in the book became the Ilya that I knew in my imagination. But then, something strange started to happen. The Ilya in the book made specific references to movies like Aliens, a movie which the Ilya I know is a huge fan of. The Ilya in the book was a big fan of firearms, as the Ilya that I know is. Put into words, these details seem slim, but there was something so strange about the character in this book that I eventually reached out to the Ilya that I knew to ask about it. turns out that Ilya knows the author, Peter Klein's, who had put him in the book. What are the odds that I would choose to buy a random book, with a story that takes place essentially on my street in Los Angeles, and features someone I know in real life as a minor character? That blew my mind, and it's easily one of the most surreal experiences I've had. Not my story, but my grandpa's. So he served in the Navy and hadn't come home for 5 years. He finally got to go home, and on his way, he saw his old friend, let's call him Wally. Wally was getting on his normal bus, and my grandpa shouted hi to him. But Wally didn't respond. But he didn't think much of it, seeing how Wally didn't have the best hearing. Wally got on his bus, and looked my grandpa in the eye as the bus drove away. Later, after he got home and was talking to his dad, he asked him how Wally was doing and told his dad about how he saw him earlier. His dad was silent for a minute, and asked him if he was sure he saw Wally. My grandpa said yes, and his dad replied, "Wally died 6 months ago. I died. I saw it, I lived it. Either it was another world with a version of me that died I saw, or I'm going crazy, but I died." We had a pep rally in school, and after it was finished we had to go back to class. Well, my friend and I were not into that, so we wanted to across the street to Sonic. Across the school there is not heavy traffic, but if you don't pay attention you could get hit. Well, I remember walking with him and he dropped something, so I went across the street first. I just saw a red Tahoe heading right for me and I got hit. I remember everything. I remember gasping for air, I remember waking up and sleeping again. Then nothing. All of a sudden I was back in the stadium again and the exact same words came out of the principal's mouth. My friend wanted to go get Sonic, but I was freaking out. Was asking him everything. I thought it had to be a dream, so I went with him just to see what would happen. He dropped his stuff again and I waited. To my horror, that same red Tahoe showed up. I told him that I'm going back to school, I ain't dying again. I can still see the other version of me on that street, just messed up. Not even moving. I was on vacation on Florida visiting a friend. We were walking on the beach on a perfectly sunny day when everything went black for a second. I think it was weird, but explained it away thinking that my eyes were playing tricks on me, until he looked at me and said, "Did everything go black for a second?" One day when I was about 8 I didn't go to school because I was sick. My friend was supposed to bring me homework etc., but he never came. My granddad came home from work and he told me that friend was dead. I was devastated. That night I had a dream. I was with my friend at a playground next to our school and we were talking. Then he told me that he is safe and it didn't hurt when that car hit him. The next day my mother wanted to talk to me about that situation and she asked me if I wanted to know what happened. I told her that I know everything because my friend told me. She thought that my granddad told me, but he did not. He said that he did not wanted to tell me without her knowing it. That night I had a dream again and I was talking to him again. We were playing and having fun and he told me that he really had to go and we won't see each other ever again. The next day was his funeral and I really haven't had a dream about him ever since. Might get buried, but oh well. When I played baseball as a kid, they were handing out the trophies at the end of the season. They called out the names of the kids while we received our trophies. There happened to be a kid with the same name as me. We met after the ceremony because it was weird since our last name isn't a very common one. We had the same birthday and everything. We looked alike. Both our dads were named Derek and both of our sisters were named Lily. As a kid, I found it cool. As an adult, I find it cool and also disturbing. There's a podcast called Radiolab. They did an episode on coincidence that has a similar story about a girl in England that releases a balloon with her name and address on it. It floats some hundreds of miles and lands in a guy's yard whose neighbor is the same age with the same name and has a bunch of similarities. This summer I bought my girlfriend a last-minute birthday trip to go kayaking around the San Juan Islands off the Washington state coast. After a long drive and ferry trip, we found the tour group of about 20 people and were then shuffled into a shuttle van for a ride to the beach. Now, my girlfriend has a unique name similar to the name of a famous painter. Let's say it's Rebecca Warhol just for fun. It's not. She's a little ray of sunshine, and started chatting with the middle-aged woman sitting next to her on the shuttle as we waited to leave. The woman noted that she had always loved the name Rebecca, as it was her mother's name. They made pleasant small talk in the van until the tour guide passed around the sign-in sheet for all of us to fill out. That's when things got strange. My girlfriend wrote her full name on the sheet and passed it on to the woman, who immediately shouted "Oh my God," and started crying. After a few minutes of total confusion, she told us Rebecca Warhol was my mother's full name, and these islands were her favorite place in the world. She passed away this summer from cancer and we've traveled hundreds of miles to spread her ashes here. We were stunned. I literally picked a random date, time, and tour company, and then we were split into the same group as this woman, and my girlfriend was sitting right next to her on the shuttle. What the hell? She continued by saying, "My daughter told us that Nana Rebecca would be with us on this trip, and I didn't believe it until now." It was the most unbelievable coincidence we had ever experienced, and has totally convinced me that there's more to this world than we think. As my brother later said, the universe winked at us that day. Several years ago, I went home, turned on my PC, browsed the web for a bit, literally watched a video about the Matrix, then looked out of my window. Then I suddenly snapped awake sitting in my chair. I looked at my monitor to see that it had turned off. I thought strange, I must have fallen asleep, and proceeded to move the mouse to wake my PC from sleep mode. It did not wake up. I was confused until I noticed that the power strip was not even plugged in. It had never been turned on in the first place. That one weirded me out for quite a while. I must have gone home, fell asleep, and dreamt the whole thing, at least I hope so. My wife and I were at the local mall shopping. We were walking around in Spencer's, and there was a display with a bunch of sexy/slutty boxed outfits. Once we saw them, we both blurted out, "This looks like something Samantha, an acquaintance we both knew from mutual friends, would wear," at the exact same time. We started laughing about it, and as we walked around the corner, the Samantha we were talking about was looking at the exact same rack but from the other side. We were both like, "What in the F?" We hadn't seen her in probably a year or so before then. That left everyone scratching their heads for a bit. I shared this a few years ago when this question was asked last time, and didn't really realize how glitchy in the Matrix it was until people started commenting, haha. In college, I took a hard news/soft news journalism class where one of the assignments was to write an obituary for one of my grandparents. The professor told us to write it on a deceased grandparent, but if all of your grandparents were still alive we had to choose one. In my case, all of my grandparents were alive. I procrastinated actually doing the assignment until the night before it was due because it seemed like a morbid assignment, especially once all of my grandparents were still alive. Scramming for an easy grandparent to write about, I gave my mom a call and asked her for some basic biographical information about my maternal grandfather. As we were talking about my grandpa's career, my mom couldn't recall the name of one of the companies he worked at. She lectured me about waiting until the last minute to write the assignment because it was late, 10:30 p.m. my grandpa's time. However, she said she would give him a call to see if he was still awake and be able to answer that question once my assignment was due the following morning. When my mom called my grandma answered the phone in a panic. My grandma frantically explained that the paramedics had just arrived and were performing CPR on my grandpa because he had stopped breathing and lost consciousness. My mom was able to stay on the phone with my grandma until they took my grandpa to the hospital, where he was declared dead. In the time my mom and I had been talking on the phone about my grandpa's obituary, he was dying. His death was entirely unexpected at that. Although he was in his 80s, he was the healthiest of my grandparents at the time. We ended up using the obituary I wrote for that writing assignment as his actual obituary. Still freaks me out when I think about the timing. Freaky. Reminds me a bit of this time when I was a kid. I had this little joke novelty thing I'd gotten at a magic shop while on vacation. This was actually so long ago I forget exactly what the thing was supposed to resemble. But it was something you were supposed to open. And it had this plastic thing inside suspended on a rubber band. You were supposed to wind this thing up and close it. You hand it to your victim sucker friend, they open it, which releases tension, allowing the plastic thing to spin around, rattling loudly against the plastic case, and vibrating in their hand, scaring the shit out of them. Anyway, I got all my relatives with this thing, because I was a funny little 10-year-old shit. My great aunt and uncle were up visiting, and staying at my grandparents' house. I had the thought to try this trick on my great aunt, but something stopped me. It didn't feel right, and I very clearly had the thought I don't want to give her a heart attack. No idea why. She was a bit older, but so were my grandparents, who I already tricked. Well, very shortly after they returned home, I get news that my great aunt has had a heart attack, and passed away. Seemed like a spooky coincidence, so that one's always stuck with me. About 2 years ago, I went to collect my husband from the ferry after work. My husband got into the car, and as I was driving very slowly out of the car park we both noticed two people standing a few meters in front of our car. It looked as though they were strangers, older looking professionals, both walking to their separate cars in different areas of the car park. The man was reaching into his side bag and the lady was further ahead than the man, with her head turned to the right. I know the exact positions they were in because they were completely frozen on the spot. My husband and I sat there watching the frozen strangers, not saying anything to each other, and then all of a sudden it was like someone pressed play and the two strangers just continued on like nothing had happened. My husband and I promised to each other that we would never forget how weird the experience was. I can't remember exactly how long they stayed frozen like that, but it was long enough to freak us both out. I have a jade Buddhist necklace I bought in China about 10 years ago. It disappears for months at a time only to reappear somewhere obvious like my desk, my dresser, in a drawer I use every day. I just say it goes on a trip and will come back eventually. One night more than a decade ago, as teenagers my friends and I were delinquenting outside of a museum. In the grass outside of the museum I found a Taoist/Feng Shui compass, used for fortune telling and the like. I've had it ever since. But it fucking disappears. Like regularly. I've lost it for months at a time before. It's at the point now that when it disappears I'm fine with it, I just say something like hey, it always comes back. And then I find it under a couch cushion or somewhere else it has no business being. It's very strange. To be honest though, since I moved into my current house it hasn't moved. Maybe decided its exploring days are behind it and it's just time to settle down. Edit, I love that my most upvoted comment is about that fucking thing. In some weird way it kinda figures. For anybody curious what it looks like, Google Luopan compass, that's what it is. 1985. My ex-wife and I were sleeping. There was a small sliver of light coming in through the window from a streetlight, so the room and bed were dimly visible. Our black Pomeranian was at the end of the bed asleep. I dreamt that I woke up, reached down to pet him, and he turned into a glossy black bivalve/oyster thing which opened up to reveal rows of gleaming glass teeth. I woke up to my ex backpedaling up the bed over the pillows towards the wall. I asked what's wrong? She said, what is that shiny black clam thing with the teeth at the end of the bed? Where's the dog? We had the same nightmare at the same time. This still gives me a chill. Every night I go to bed about 2 hours before my husband. I always wake up when he comes into the room. One night he was gaming with a friend and it was hours later I heard him sneak into the room and crawl across the floor so he could pop up and scare me. I felt the floor kind of shake and felt him bump clumsily against the side of the bed in the dark. I held out my hand and asked him not to scare me. I was already scared enough and begged him to just take my hand and come to bed. I couldn't see anything in the room, but knew he was there and just waited for him to jump up so I could move on and go back to sleep. That's when I heard him talking to his friend in the other room. I was frozen. I know there's sleep paralysis or lucid dreaming or something that explains this, but I would have sworn on my son's life that someone had crawled across the floor and jostled the bed. Eventually I worked out of the fear enough to grab my phone and text my husband to come in and turn on the lights and check under the bed. But holy shit, it boggles me how real it felt. ETA, thank you for the silver. It's my first. Thank you to everyone who's confirmed sleep paralysis, kind of comforting to have that as the answer, maybe if it happens again that knowledge will help. Also, it was likely inspired by watching Markiplier play Don't Open Your Eyes. Sleep with your doors shut, kids, you'll thank me later. 3 Scary Games number 36. A friend and I went to a buddy's house for a b-day party. Stayed up playing Halo 2 and hanging out. We all crashed in the basement. Our friend who came with me, and I got up at the same time. Not like one after each other, we both got up at the same time after being asleep for a few hours and rushed to the bathroom. R was more athletic than me, probably still is, and beat me there. I ran upstairs, barely getting my head over the toilet before puking my guts out. R was doing the same thing in the basement. I was wearing a wooden cross my grandmother mailed me from Romania. I'm not religious but I appreciated the gift as I had never met her at that point. Cross somehow became detached from the cord, fell on the tile and broke into 2 pieces. So we both call our respective mothers and get picked up. By now it's like 3 to 4 a.m. Felt sick up until we left the house. Once I was in the car and a few blocks away, felt perfectly fine. R reported the same thing to me that day over MSN Messenger. Felt perfectly fine after a few blocks. Got the pictures developed a few weeks later. There's a picture of us on the couch rocking some Halo and the whole room looks like it's filled with mist. Super spooky. I've been looking for the pic for a long time and I can't seem to find it anymore, but every few years my sister and I search my mom's photo albums for it. 2 things. Each was witnessed by at least one other person and both were while driving. Once at a stop sign in a neighborhood. All of these little sparkles started swirling around in midair roughly 3 to 4 feet off the ground out of nowhere. The group of them were roughly 2 feet wide by 3 to 4 feet tall. It lasted 3 to 5 seconds and then they were gone. No one was around, and when I asked my passenger if he saw it too, he breathed a sigh of relief and said yes. We spoke about it a little more, but there is no reasonable explanation. The second happened when myself and 3 friends were driving down an empty country road. Very straight stretch. A man on a bike appeared. Someone said to watch out for him, so not to hit him, and then he disappeared. Our minds were blown, to say the least. Just poof and he's gone. All of these little sparkles started swirling around in midair roughly 3 to 4 feet off the ground out of nowhere. The group of them were roughly 2 feet wide by 3 to 4 feet tall. It lasted 3 to 5 seconds and they were gone. Someone in your party leveled up. I once clocked out of work at 6 p.m., like I always did at the time, and began my hour-long train ride home. After I had found a seat, I went to sleep and woke up just before my station. From the station, it is a short bus journey, 10 to 15 minutes, to reach home. During the entire journey, I didn't use my phone and I don't wear a watch, so I didn't really notice the time anywhere. When I reached home, my family surprised me with "You're home early, everything all right?" I look at the wall clock and it is about to be 6 p.m. I was too shocked to understand what happened. Checked other watches, cell phones, etc., and the time is absolutely right. A few days later, the admin emailed us the timesheets for the month, times clocking in and out, and every single day for me was around the same 6 p.m., so it certainly wasn't me having left work earlier. To this date, I haven't figured out how I gained between 60 to 90 minutes that day. Edit 1, wow. Thank you for the pirate silver mateys. This is most popular comment ever. Gained an hour, or so, and some karma to go with it. Edit 2, the most common theory in comments seems to be the DST, and I have considered it before. The problem is that it should work for both time in and time out, and if I remember, the time in was the same as always and I didn't leave my home early for work. If I remember right, it also wasn't a Monday, which is when the clock reset effects come through at work despite the changes going in on Sunday. I was driving about 50 miles per hour, and a car ran a stop sign on an on-ramp and pulled out right in front of me. I remember bracing for impact, and then I was about 300 yards down the highway and I saw the car at the ramp in my rear view, just about to pull out. You died on the spot and your mind is living an alternate timeline. AKA quantum immortality. Yep, that's similar to what a lot of people have reported. Almost immediately before a fatal car accident, then boom, it's like the event was a hallucination, missing vehicles, different weather, different spot on the road, etc., and afterwards a feeling like things have shifted. I was driving during a snowstorm when a police car started driving next to me, lights on, no sirens. I looked at the officers but they didn't look at me. They had a weird look on their face. Something was off. They accelerated just a little to pass me and then completely disappeared. I drove maybe 15 minutes on the road without seeing them anywhere. They couldn't have gone really far, the road's conditions were terrible. I was creeped out for a long time. Once when we were kids, I had some friends with an Ouija board at the basement of the building where I lived. Through the stairs there was an elevator shaft that had these wide bars where you could stick your arm in them, typical old elevator design. So one night, they decided to go to the basement to do another Ouija session, and I decided to drop a cup of glass through the shaft, just to scare them off. I let go of the cup, saw it vanish into the darkness, and I never heard the cup hit the ground. I stood there, confused. Next day, I went downstairs at the basement with one of my friends, and the cup was there, placed in the middle of the elevator shaft floor. The cup was upright, and intact. I was seriously freaked out by that, because it would be impossible to someone enter the elevator shaft and place the cup there like that. The cup should have broken into pieces since I threw it from the 10th floor against a cement floor. The entire world have slowed down for me a couple of times in my life. My best guess is some kind of adrenaline spike causing my brain to go into overdrive. I was walking my dog and I was almost to the driveway when I looked down for some reason, and I looked back up and I ended up being back at the road about 6 blocks away from where I thought I was. I was so confused, but my dog looked completely fine. FYI, I don't drink or do drugs, I'm still pretty young. It's an odd thing where people close to me talk about things I was previously thinking of before I see them. Holy shit, same. Especially lately I've noticed, he'll be thinking about something for a little while and then right before I'm about to mention it, my boyfriend will say something almost exact to what I had been thinking about. It's to the point where I'm starting to look at him suspiciously, because how the F can you just coincidentally say every single thing I'm thinking about or about to say this many times, lol. After my little brother was murdered the next morning, I was talking with a friend and he mentioned this other dude I went to high school with younger brother had died in a car accident a couple weeks before. Later that day I pull out a slip of paper with this other dude's number and name on it from my pants. I vaguely remember running into him a year or so before this at a club where he gave me his number. I swear I had worn and washed these jeans at least a dozen times since I had run into this dude. I still makes no sense how that paper was there and I only found it then. I called the dude and we talked a bunch. It really helped me deal with the situation. Around 12 years ago I had a dark purple 3 Series BMW which I drove to work and parked in the same spot for around 3 years. I sold the car due to mileage and wanting something a little more reliable and purchased a different car. 1 week later, I turn up to work to find my purple BMW parked in my parking spot. I was totally WTF? Turns out that we had a work experience kid start that day, and his dad had dropped him off in my old car that he bought 2 days earlier. What are the chances of that? I've never met this kid or his dad, and yet here was my old car in my /it space. Edit. My most popular comment ever. Lots of people saying it may be Techno Schwartz, but I'm pretty sure it was Violet Schwartz. Here's a picture, although it looks way more navy here than in real life, from my potato camera in September 2006. https://imgur.com/gallery/cc9umdz. My wife just saw me uploading this and asked what I was doing. We were dating when I had this car and started telling me how much she loved it. Bless it. My sister pretended to feed my bear when we were kids. I saw the beans on the spoon. She put it to his mouth and scooped, showed me the spoon and the beans were gone. No beans on his lip. Nothing, like he actually ate it. She never told me how she did it and she doesn't remember doing it now. I assume you're talking about a teddy bear, but I kind of hope you're not. I had just pulled into the parking lot of where I worked and was walking towards the building. It was like 3 in the afternoon, broad daylight. All of a sudden, I heard an ambulance's siren start sounding. Naturally, I looked down the road to try and see the ambulance. I see it approaching and decided to watch it for a bit. It was quickly getting closer, and it was about to pass right by me. However, there was a large SUV waiting to turn out of the parking lot and onto the road, blocking a few meters of the road from my view. The ambulance passed behind the SUV, probably about 50 feet away from me at most, and I vividly remember the siren becoming completely silent in that instant. The ambulance had vanished entirely as it passed behind that SUV. I was so confused. The road did not have many cars on it at the time, and it was broad daylight. I did a triple take and made sure that I didn't just miss it. I had a clear view of the road going both directions, and there was no more ambulance to be seen. No more siren either. I walked up and down the road, trying to find it for a solid minute. But nope, it was gone. I was well rested, not on drugs, and I didn't have a history of hallucinations. It seems dismissible, but I was completely aware of what happened, and I can't explain it to this day. I used to have terrible sleep paralysis. Thankfully it hasn't happened in about a year now. I woke up once to fairy demon things hovering just above my bed and glowing, which normally I would have stayed somewhat calm until they left, but I also visualized my cat hissing at them with her ears flat back. Really messed with me that my mind did that to me. My wife passed away a year ago today. Had some odd things happen, like a couple of old meaningful pictures show up that I swore were in storage. The strangest one was I vacuumed the carpet and as soon as I was done a diamond ring was on the ground right where I had just cleaned. It was like she was saying, "Hey, this one is real, don't lose it. This one is really lovely, I'm sorry for your loss, I hope finding these things brought back some wonderful memories." When I was living with my parents, my dad was cleaning out one of his drawers and found a piece of paper with a postcode for a nearby city on. When he showed me, I immediately recognized it as my own handwriting, except I have no memory of ever writing out this postcode, so I punched the postcode into maps to find it is a random street I have never visited before and I have no reason to visit it. I wish I had have gone. Maybe the universe was trying to show me something. Around 12 years old I was watching Megas XLR, or something that was on at the time. Sitting there I noticed that the sun just turned off. Like completely. I was real confused, opened the blinds and it was dark. Show was still at the same spot. But the clock on the cable box said it was 5 hours later. My best guess for what happened was that I passed out without realizing it, like those nights where you lay in bed and blink and suddenly it's morning. So I'm guessing I fell asleep sitting up, for exactly enough time to have Cartoon Network play a rerun of the show, get to the exact spot I fell asleep at. Was surreal though. I should have fallen into the River Thames once. Me and some friends from uni were exploring London and taking pictures beside the Thames when I decide posing next to the wall is a weak photo, so decide to climb up for better photo opportunities. As I hoisted myself up I must have used far too much power and knew fully I was about to go straight over and into the river, which was like a 20-feet drop. I managed to get one foot onto the wall and felt something completely stop my momentum. Almost felt like divine intervention in a way. I stood up straight, alive and still on dry land. As I turned to express how close I was to dying there, and then someone took a photo of me, which is still one of the best photos I've had taken of me to date. I've told this story before and could go into a ton of detail, but here's the short version. I am 100% sure I vividly remember a dog that apparently doesn't exist. When I was 16 we lived on the other side of the province and my uncle had this little Jack Russell named Crew. Crew went missing for several months and then turned up at a humane society over an hour away, and we were all shocked this little dog has made it so far. Anyway, that was almost 20 years ago, and the other day I was talking to my parents and was like, whenever I hear about Jack Russells I think about Crew and that stunt he pulled, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Insisted my uncle had never had such a dog, I must have dreamed it, etc. Honestly, anyone else who would have remembered this dog has been dead for a long time, and I don't even have any pictures of my uncle. I have absolutely no way to prove this dog existed, but I'm sure that he did. They may have just forgotten. My parents are like this as well. Not that long ago I was telling them about a letter I had written to my dad while he was away a few years ago. They both insisted I must have dreamt it, but I found it not long after. Sometimes people can be forgetful, it doesn't necessarily mean Crew didn't exist. Smile. Very true, it was a chaotic time. My uncle passed away very unexpectedly shortly before we moved and everything felt like a whirlwind. I still wish I could prove or disprove the existence of this dog because I remember him so vividly and my family does not. Not even my brothers, though they were much younger and don't remember much about that time at all. I was working on my motorcycle in a dirt lot where I had crashed it trying to do a sick drift, breaking off the clutch lever and the gear shifter. I had brought a wrench set with me and I was using one of them to take off a bolt when I put it down on the ground to finish unscrewing the bolt with my hand. 2 minutes later I went to pick it back up and it was gone. I ran all around this dirt lot looking for it to no avail. Luckily I had a spare in the car. Fixed the bike and drove back to my apartment to shower as I was filthy. I walked in my room and sitting on my desk was the wrench. I was dumbfounded. This reminds me of when I was in dance as a little girl. I remember throwing my dance shoe over my shoulder as I was getting ready in my room. When I turned around to grab it I couldn't find it anywhere. My mom and I searched for 10 minutes before we decided to leave without the shoe so we wouldn't be too late to practice. We found the slipper in my winter boot by the porch just as we were leaving, which was across the house from where I was when I tossed my slipper. I don't personally remember this, but I would see my dead grandfather all the time when I was a kid. From the ages of 7 to 9 there was probably 10 different incidents. My dad was an absolute pansy when it came to ghosts, which I don't really believe in, and wanted to take me to the doctor. My dad had one of those bathrooms with a separate toilet room and no one that lived in the house closed the bathroom door unless they were bathing. I was playing RuneScape and my dad asked why the bathroom door was closed, and I said it's because Grandpa's in there. That's the only one I actually remember. There was maybe 2 other bathroom incidents and some incidents when I would sit on the floor and watch TV with my dad and he would tell me to go sit in the what was once my grandfather's chair and said I couldn't because Grandpa was sleeping. I don't know how creepy these are tbh, but they freaked out my family for sure. I remember driving my car to this intersection in this rural area and I'm checking both sides because of terrible blind spots. In the corner of my eye my mother is sitting there and says something like it's all clear my way. I look back and she isn't there. My mother had been dead for a few years at this point. This was also in the middle of the day and I've never had it happen since. I was reading Kurt Vonnegut's last book, Timequake, and had put it in my backpack to read while on the bus. I left the house and for some reason about a block later I thought to myself, did I put the book in my bag? I looked and it wasn't there, went back to the house and couldn't find it, retraced my steps to where I turned around and it was nowhere to be found. I never found the book again, and gave up on trying to get another copy. I think it was Vonnegut's way of telling me it wasn't worth the read. Well, my story is a bit creepy cause I lost myself. This was like 7 years ago when I was still in high school. It was a normal day, all classes went well till the math class began. The teacher was explaining the lesson and how it was related to the previous lesson we had the previous day. Everything the teacher was explaining was new to me and never heard before, so I was like, yeah sure. I wasn't paying attention again during that class, so I opened my notebook to check what I wrote about that class. I always write everything discussed during math class cause I sucked at math and my dad was strict about it, which got my teacher to be strict also with me, and found nothing about the previous class. I asked my friend sitting next to me to give me his notebook to make sure, and I found like a whole new material from the last class that I've never seen before. So I started investigating after the class, going around asking my classmates this crazy question: was I here yesterday during the math class? And they were like, what? And I explained the whole thing to them, and apparently I was not there. I attended both classes before and after the math class and wrote everything of both classes in my notebook, but I have no memory where I was during the math class. And the schools where I live have a one-class system where students stay in their class and teachers come to them for the lecture, then leave and the next subject's teacher comes and so on. So we know each other well, and everybody I asked said that I wasn't there during the math class. So yeah, I lost myself for approximately an hour. My friend Sarah was in a nightclub, drunk off her face, when she got an overwhelming urge to tell a total stranger that her leg hurts. It didn't. All a bit strange. She ignores it, but it doesn't stop, so she walks up to this guy and says, I know this is crazy, but I've got a huge urge to tell you my leg hurts. I know that's crazy, again. Sorry. But he bursts into tears. Turns out his dad had just died and they made a pact before that if there was an afterlife he would get a message to him saying a totally random phrase, so there could be no mistakes, which they decided was I've hurt my leg. Every time I drop something and it literally disappears to nothingness. Like WTF? Guitar picks? Earrings? Babies? What? When the song The Final Countdown was released in the 80s, I already knew it. It was brand new, just released, but I knew the tune and the words and could sing the whole thing beginning to end. I believed for a while that it was a cover version, but it wasn't. I don't know if it's true, but I remember my father, who was a kid in the 80s, telling me that The Final Countdown was released and wasn't successful, but then released again a year later and that's when it exploded. That would explain that. It isn't creepy, but when I was in high school I had a dream I was in all-white classroom, totally white, like the ones you would see in a dream, and a girl was sitting in the chair on my side. During the dream, I knew it was a dream because the girl was a senior. We didn't have common classes. About 6 years later, I was at a master class. The sun was shining bright outside, the classroom was very illuminated, and I see this girl on my side. We are doing masters together. And having a class, in all white effing classroom. Of course I remembered the dream at that very moment. So this has always bothered me. I was 13 years old at the time and my dad was a coal miner. He worked third shift, known as the hood owl shift, which was midnight to noon. As such he got home around 2 p.m. and slept till around 9, got up, had dinner with us and left for work. My dad was always pretty gruff and constantly yelled at us if my younger brother or I made too much noise and woke him up after getting home from somewhere, which as an adult now I completely understand. So one day I did something to wake him up, I forget what. Anyways, he calls me back to the bedroom and I'm expecting to get a dressing down, but he just looked at me and said, "It's okay. Come over here and give me a hug." What 13-year-old boy wants to hug their dad? I kinda squirmed a bit and he followed up with, "What if something happened to me?" And just laid there all grizzled and tired. I didn't hug him. That night there was an accident in the mine. He saved everyone on his crew, including the one person he went back in for. His was the only death, and I'm convinced he knew it was gonna happen. I'll never forget his eyes that day. If someone asked you for a hug, give it to them. I love you, Dad. Edit, my very first gold. I'm so glad this resonated with someone. Second edit, this obviously resonated with more than one person. Words can't express how much I appreciate it. Thank you to everyone that shared their own stories of loss. I'm trying to read them all. If I miss one, I'm sorry. Thank you for sharing your story. My grandfather was a railroad worker. He and my grandmother lived within a close walk of the rail yard. My grandmother said one day that he said she should not leave his dinner out like she did every night. He walked to the end of their sidewalk, then stopped and took a long look at her. She says it felt like he was truly taking her in. Looked her head to toe. He dropped dead less than an hour later at work. Stood up to throw away an orange peel and just fell over, dead before he hit the ground. My grandmother is convinced he knew that would be the last time he saw her. A sense of impending doom is actually a symptom of some fatal issues like embolism, blood clots, etc., so he very well could have felt his body telling him something was wrong. I've told this on Reddit before, but here it is. I had a very important document that I only ever kept in one place. I kept it in the top drawer of a small filing cabinet. I never moved it and would always see it in the drawer whenever I opened it for whatever reason. The day came that I needed it now and I didn't sweat it because I knew exactly where it was. Well, I'd be damned if it wasn't there. Cue panic attack. I tore that filing cabinet up. I removed everything and spread it out, flipped papers over, dug through envelopes, shook everything out, shined a flashlight all through the emptied cabinet in case it was somehow stuck to the sides. I mean, it was not there. I can assure you no one took it or was messing with me. I was so frustrated. I even looked through other parts of my house. But I knew it wouldn't be in any of those places and it wasn't. I was intermittently going back to the dumb filing cabinet. No luck. Super irritated, I searched the rest of the house again and, on my way back downstairs where my filing cabinet was, I called out in frustration, "Okay. Bring it back." I don't know who I thought I was talking to because I was alone, but you guessed it. I found it in the top drawer of my filing cabinet where it should have been in the first place. I was relieved and totally freaked out. Taking the trash out at night, super remote area so I know for a fact we're the only ones around here, getting close to the road and I hear very clearly "help me" from a female voice. Even knowing there's such a slim chance of there being another living person around, I still feel like I should look around and check it out in case I wasn't just hearing things and someone actually needs help. Take about 2 steps in the direction I thought I heard it, hear a giggle in the same exact voice, turn around and walk promptly back up the driveway because F that. Anyone who actually needed help wouldn't be laughing, I don't think. When I was a child my sister and I were walking home from the park and a man called help. We found an open manhole and could hear the man calling for help, but we could not see him. I was 9 and panicking thought we should crawl in to help. My sister, 11, had the good instinct to get our parents. When we came back with them the man was gone. As an adult I can see the whole thing was a ploy, the manhole right next to the park. It makes complete sense but is still so creepy. I have a good one. I was about 12 years old, and woke up in the middle of the night needing to take a leak. I walked across the hall to the little bathroom, hit the lights, and was about to reach for the toilet when I glanced up and saw a face in the mirror. It was not my face. It was as if someone was on the other side, standing to the right, with their face right next to the glass, staring at me. I only saw it for the briefest moment, but it is seared into my brain. I screamed, and ran out of there to find my dad. Of course, my dad investigated, then calmed me down, or tried to. Eventually we had a prayer session, because I was so freaked out. Eventually I must have gone back to sleep. Fast forward to my 30s. I'd forgotten all about the event. One night while visiting, my dad quietly brings it up. "Remember that one time you saw a face in the mirror?" It suddenly came back to me in a rush of memory, sending a chill down my spine. "Yay, I remember." "Well," he said, "I sometimes think about that night." He looked down at the floor, with a serious expression. I saw it too. He went on to describe exactly what I'd seen. We have no idea what that was. Apparently when he investigated, he saw it and had a freak out of his own. Apparently the prayer session was as much for his own nerves as mine. I respect him for keeping that tidbit from me till my 30s, but I kinda wish he'd never told me.